Hey y'all! Well, today we're going to do a comparison on some output tubes. And one thing you need to understand on these direct heated triode amplifiers that have zero negative feedback, which is what this one's built as, the output tube has a lot of influence on the distortion, the profiles, the power output, and all that stuff, a lot more than on an amp that has negative feedback, and especially if it has global negative feedback. That will kind of negate or, undo, change, offset, whatever you want to call it, the impact that the output tube has on the sound of the amplifier. And that's one thing that you'll read about. It's true in a lot of cases, especially these amplifiers that have a lot of global negative feedback, that almost doesn't matter what kind of tubes you put in it, it's all going to sound the same. But when you have a single-ended, zero negative feedback, direct heated triode amp like this one is, the output tubes have a big impact on the way the amplifier sounds. And even different tubes of the same brand that should be identical, they're not. And one of them might perform great, the other one might be just mediocre. And that's one of the problems that you have with these direct heated zero feedback amps, is trying to find a good pair of tubes. And honestly, if you don't have something like the audio analyzer suite, something you can hook up to your laptop, or some other way of doing distortion profiles and looking at the second and third order harmonics and all that kind of stuff, it's going to be really hard for you to be able to tell if you've got a good pair of tubes. And sometimes just moving them around in the amp makes a difference, or pairing them with different driver tubes can make a difference. And so, yeah, it's, without that kind of a tuning tool, it's really hard to just do it by ear. And you can hear the difference, but it's very subtle. So anyway, the purpose of this video is we wanted to compare some of these black bottle 300B-Z tubes made by ShuGuang. I always pronounce that wrong. ShuGuang, ShuGuang, however you pronounce that. Anyway, some of those to some of the modern production Western Electric 300B tubes that they're making here in Georgia. And these are $1,500 for a pair. When these were first released, I think they were about $600 for a pair. They're down to old stock. I'm not even sure if you can buy them anymore. And I got 2 pairs of these from Yoda Electronics, and I'll look and see if they've still got any. The first pair I got were just these plain ones that just say 300B-Z on them. And then the second pair I got were 50th anniversary labeled ones. So yeah, I don't know about all that. I don't know if there's any difference between the two of them. I've been using these other ones and saving these for like backup spares, because I originally built this amp. It had EdCore output transformers, and we went over that in the previous video. What a huge upgrade these ISO-Tango output transformers were. But I originally built it with Electro Harmonix 300B tubes, and it just didn't sound very good. I mean, I knew something wasn't right just listening to it, because my little 6SQ7 EL34 amp sounded much better. And it didn't make a lot of power measuring it. Something just didn't seem right. And so I read online about all these super expensive tubes, including these, and these got really good reviews from, kind of the DHT head folks. And so I bought a pair of them because I found them on sale, and yeah, it sounded so much better. I've been listening to those since I built this amp. One of the guys that brought over an R300 had bought a pair of these to put in his R300, and so I thought I would toss them in this amp now that I got these output transformers on it, and take a listen to them and see what these are all about. A lot of hype about them. And so sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just hype. And we've learned that on this channel, that sometimes things that are super hyped up don't turn out to be all that great. Sometimes they deserve the hype they get. And that's what we're going to try to do today, is unravel the mystery do these things deserve the hype that they get? So let's test these things out, and then we'll do a subjective listening review. Okay, so I put this pair of Western Electric 300B tubes. These are the new production ones. It's a $1,500 pair of tubes. And let them warm up and did the THD versus power pull on it. And what I'm seeing is at the lower power levels, it does have less distortion. The other tube, the line was basically parallel to this input voltage line. That's what this greenish blue line is the input voltage. And the THD with the Shuggie 300B-Z tubes basically just rolled along right above this line. So here at, this 1 to 2, 3 watt range, the Western Electric tubes have less distortion, but then once you get up here around 5 watts and up, it's got more distortion. And here at 8 watts, we were seeing, I believe it was just over 2% distortion with the 300B-Z tubes, and with these Western Electric tubes, it's just going past 5%. So we're trading off some less distortion down here at the lower power levels and higher distortion at the higher power levels. And again, if we look here, well, it's actually taking more input signal to get to 8 watts than it did with the 300B-Z tubes. So let's take a look at our scope and see where we start clipping with these tubes. Here's 1 volt with a sine wave, and we're not clipping. Let's see what 1.1 looks like. Just starting to try to clip here on the bottom, and I have a feeling by 1.2 volts we're going to be clipping. Yeah, we're starting to clip here at 1.2 volts. So really 1.1 volts in is kind of the threshold of what I would call, not hard clipping. And if we go back here to our THD versus power, yeah, it's taking 1.1 volts RMS to get to even 6.5 watts. So I'm not sure why these are putting out less power for the same input signal. Hey, but it just is. You know me, I'll report things the way I see them. So let's look at the THD versus frequency. And this is at 3 watts. And we are seeing higher distortion at the lower frequencies than we saw with the 300B-Z tubes. But if you look at the spectrum analysis on the left, we've got more odd order harmonics, and that's seen here. Less even order, more odd order. And I did listen to these tubes before I put them on the audio analyzer suite, just like I did with the first set of tubes. And honestly, these just don't sound as musical as those Shuggie 300B-Z tubes did, which kind of surprised. But honestly, with you guys, I'm kind of glad, because I really wasn't relishing the thought of having to go out and spend $1,500 on a pair of tubes if these were just going to knock my socks off. And they just didn't really do that, at least in my amplifier. And I feel like now I've got output transformers that are transparent enough to hear the difference. So yeah, that's what I'm seeing. And again, it's, for whatever reason, it's not making, because like here's 1 volt RMS in, and it was making 8 watts with the 300B-Z tubes, and it's making 5.5 with these Western Electrics. And again, this is a cathode biased amp. These are running at about 75 milliamps across the cathode, but for whatever reason, they're not making as much power. So yeah, that's kind of a bullet dodged. I'm going to stick with my 300B-Z tubes, and I'm lucky enough to have 2 pairs of them. There may be some still out there. I'm not sure. I know they're no longer in production, so it's not something like I couldn't build amplifiers and, you know, supply those tubes because they're just not available. But for my own personal amp, I'm glad I've got a pair. So anyway, this looks like a good place to wrap up this video. Well, as you can see, there was definitely a difference between running these tubes and the Western Electric tubes. And I don't want to say sadly. I mean, I'm glad that they're not better, because now I don't need to go spend $1,500. I was scared that those things were going to be like this light years leap ahead in sonic quality that these ISO-Tango transformers were, and that I was going to have to dump another $1,500 in this amp to really take it to the next level. And yeah, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if this circuit is more optimized for these tubes, and those Western Electric tubes just don't shine in this circuit. But the operating point that I've got these tubes at is in the Western Electric data sheet, and it's right in line with what it should be to kind of medium power these tubes. I'm not stressing these things much at all. I mean, they're a little stressed because I like running my single-ended amps a little hot, but these aren't like pushed to the limit like I am those KT120 tubes or some of those other Pentodes. I've actually tried running these hotter, and they didn't like it. They like being run where they're run right now. And so did the Electro-Harmonics tubes. So it could be that these Western Electric tubes need to be biased up hotter. Not sure, but it is what it is. I'm glad that these perform as well as they do. As far as listening test, between the 2 different tubes, there wasn't a huge difference. These have a little more just punch to them, and they seem to have a little bit more kind of sparkly lightness to them than the Western Electric tubes did. The Western Electric tubes had a really nice sweet mid-range to them, which, if you listen to a lot of horn music and stuff, they're probably going to be great. But with the genres that I listen to, you know, everything from, you know, fairly hard rock to, don't listen to metal, but, you know, listen to hard rock, some Eagles and that kind of stuff. I mean, some people wouldn't even call that hard rock, but anyway, that kind of music to jazz and female vocals, these tubes sound amazing. And so I will look at Yoda Electronics to see if they still have some. I know the Parts Connection had some too. Also, next year, I talked with George. He sells EML or ELM. I can't remember which one it is right now. But their brand, they're made in the Czech Republic, handmade 300B tubes that he said are really awesome. Going to give a pair of those a try, see how they compare to these. They're like half the price of the Western Electric tubes. And so, you know, there is that. The problem with 300B amps, and I tell people this, is there are no cheap, good tubes. And the only reason these 300B-Z tubes are cheap now is because they're out of production and people are selling off old stock. And, you know, the only fear now of buying these are these old stock rejects. I don't know. You know, I wouldn't buy them from somewhere that you can't return them, but they are, I think I paid $250 for a pair of these, which is really dirt cheap for a 300B tube. And so it might be worth the gamble. I do know they sound really good. And I'm actually glad that I don't need to go out and spend $1,500 on those Western Electric tubes, because at least in this circuit with DC heaters where it's being run, they just really don't have anything over these tubes, and they don't make as much power as they do, nor are they as clean sounding. And so it is what it is. Again, I don't want to like bust the bubble of these people that are trying to make tubes here in the U.S., by saying that, you know, these are overhyped, because maybe with AC heaters, maybe if they're run closer to their hot bias point, that they, you know, shine, and that I'm running them somewhere where they're not happy. But if you've got one of my 300B amps, these tubes sound better. Don't waste your money. So anyway, hope you're enjoying this content. If you are, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Thanks again to you Patreon folks, and also you folks that make donations to my website. Merch store has some merch. You can partake in that. Also, occasionally I'll put affiliate links, which I get a little piece of. I'm supposed to advertise that every once in a while. Yes, those are affiliate links. Doesn't cost you any more money, but I do get a little bit from Amazon, so I can buy parts and speakers and stuff so I can review on the channel, so we can learn more about how to do audio on a budget. And till the next video, have a nice day.